right, I'd like to call this meeting of the West Oswestmocky School Board to order. Ms. Carr, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, injustice for all.
Thank you so much. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Carr.
Here.
Ms. Steele. Here. Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
Mr. Burns was going to try to join remotely, but he's not. So he is excused for tonight. Mr. Becker.
Here.
Mrs. Lee. Here. Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda this evening?
And we have no changes.
Okay, great. Well, then we'll just move right into the superintendent's report.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We will start with 6.1, the legislative updates. A little more information on the case Kennedy versus Brampton School District. So Van Briesen and Roper, another education law firm, in its most recent legal update focuses on this particular case, and 4 lessons were expanded upon in the latest information. The first is how a school district portrays a staff member's conduct in the disciplinary communication matters. So it's something that we're going to try to learn more about, so how we communicate disciplinary concerns. School districts can no longer lean on the establishment clause to reprimand staff for engaging in public prayer. School policies may not exclusively target religious exercise. And the 4th lesson is not all speech by school employees is government speech. So there's quite a bit of new learning as this gets sorted out, and we're taking advice from a number of places. And a study looks at ways federal government shortchanges K-12 public education. So the federal government contributes roughly 8% of the $795 billion that annually goes towards educating the nation's 50 million children. In many cases, however, the federal share falls short of its self-imposed targets, shortchanging schools on anything from high-need students in special education to facilities and school meals. Quote, this shortfall will persist without more vigorous and reliable federal intervention, argue the authors of the new report on funding sources for K-12 schools. Instead of asking districts to rely on volatile state and local revenue, they say, the federal government needs to dramatically step up its investment in K-12 education or proactively establish funding programs that help schools during economic downturns. And a few key findings: high poverty districts frequently get fewer dollars per student than low poverty districts, and we would fall into that category. Economic downturns like the Great Recession in the late 20s magnify these gaps, and many states fail to cover districts whose local funding falls well short of adequacy. And there's some citations there if you wanted to read more. And then 6.2. Is the Board of Education recognitions, and this is from Sodexo. So a shout out, so it's from Steve Cosner, a shout out to Vicky Lacher, I'm not sure, Sherry Winston, Julie DeZengel, Mike Groff, and Terry Mikalski for supporting our summer meals program. We distributed over 17,000 meals so far. So thanks to all of them. And then 6.3, just a couple quick updates. So on our last meeting, which was July 11th, we heard from one member of the public regarding our theater program. And in those comments, we appreciate both the support of the program as well as the feedback regarding access and transportation. And we're always reviewing ways to increase both the access and participation. So we'll continue with those efforts and to see if there's other opportunities for us. And then a little bit on update around facility planning. So the board's aware, and this is a little more for the public, on June 18th, our board participated in a closed session to consult with our attorney regarding the possible sale of vacant school district properties. And during the session, the board and our attorney provided some feedback and directions on next steps. So then Steve Eichmann and I met last week to discuss the next steps, and our plan is then to present or develop a report, and probably in addition a presentation that'll help move the decision-making process forward with our board. In the report and presentation, we'll draft priorities regarding the disposition of vacant properties based on our meeting on June 18th. And then with each of the properties that will either be vacant, so there's 3 schools, but we also own other lots that the district has simply had for many years. And so we're going to develop, based on our conversation again from June 18th, various options that were discussed. And then what we're going to ask the board to do is prioritize those options. What are the first 1, 2, 3 related to each of the properties? Because there may be 8, 9, 10 viable options or ideas that surface, but to spend money with architects and engineers and brokers to investigate each of them is probably not a good investment of energy and money. So we're going to ask the board to prioritize kind of, yes, for Lane, we'd like to learn more about A, B, C. Or with Longfellow, we want to learn more about C, D, and E. And then we'll bring that back for some decision-making to keep moving us forward. And then finally, related to facilities, I ran into Steve Eichmann today in the parking lot, and he was just giving me a quick update on some of the summer work. And he said, have you gone out to Hale to see how the fields are going? And I was like, actually, I have not. And so then at lunchtime, I drove over to Hale, and it's pretty impressive what happens when they replace, thousands of square yards of carpeting, essentially, outdoor turf. But it's actually improving the facilities, I think, in a pretty important way. So I think, athletes, coaches, the public will appreciate kind of what's been done there, and on time and without, like I've said previously, without raising taxes, having to go to referendum. It's dollars that, the board thoughtfully set aside each budget year. And there's the evidence of it. So I just thought I'd share that as kind of a really kind of cool thing on a beautiful day to go out and walk a field. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to item 7, which is our public comments. For anyone who might be watching via Zoom, each person who would like to address the board would have 3 minutes to do so and need to state your name and address before you begin. The board will not debate or discuss anything that you said, but if there's any easy questions that we can answer right after you end your comments, we can certainly do that. But there will not be any back and forth discourse. Currently, there's no one signed up for public comments, but I'll wait for about 30 seconds in case anyone is online and looking and would like to address the board. There should be a link in the chat for those attending via Zoom where you can fill out the online form. Okay, well, seeing no one has signed up, I will close public comments at this time, and we'll move on to item 8, the board reports, starting with 8.1, which is a review of our board calendar. So today is Monday, July 25th at 6 p.m. We have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a workshop with our consultant, Melissa Matarazzo, and immediately following that will be a closed session meeting. On Monday, August 8th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. On Monday, August 15th at 6 p.m., we have a financial stability and efficiency workshop, going over health insurance and wellness center RFP presentations, as well as facility and grounds overview, including an update of our long-range facility master plan. And then on Monday, August 22nd at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. So let's move on to our board reports. Item 8.2.1, Recreation and Community Services. Mr. Sikich.
I have it here. Our committee met on, our committee met on Monday, July 18th. Our first agenda item was a review of the summer recreation program enrollment to date. Participation is up significantly from last summer and is gradually returning to pre-pandemic levels. Then our committee spent some time discussing youth sports in the K-12 area and some of the challenges that we're experiencing as a district that also mirrors what is happening across the state and the country. Our committee approved Shelley and the district athletic team moving forward with a survey focusing on participation. The team has researched working with a consultant that would host small focus groups a town hall and provide report out at this time. The proposal received for consultation services is on hold due to the cost of the services. The committee supports moving forward once the survey feedback is received. The committee will be working with Shelley for the and the district athletic teams to propose adoption of a district procedure and/or a formal board policy regarding the process for high school athletic teams co-oping. This would be in addition to the inclusive of the current practice of co-oping with the district when it is mutually beneficial. Our committee then took some time to focus on Fund 80 facility projects that have been recently completed or that are in process and are planned for long-term as part of their CIP. The new inclusive playground and accessible paths at Fairview Park, which is the park that's located where the recreation center is completed and has been very well received by the community and the neighbors. The most important critics, the kids, gave it a 2 thumbs up. They are currently receiving bids for the development of a youth soccer complex that would include 4 fields and a restroom and storage facility. And some of those fields are kind of in limbo, so that's not set in concrete yet, but that's next on the docket. And then out at the WAC, the West Allis Athletic Complex, the scoreboard was supposed to be finished by the end of last week. I haven't been notified if it has or not. But if it does, then Shelley and her team is gonna go out there and take a look to make sure that it's working and run through everything so that it's definitely ready to go for the start of the football season. And then they've also applied for a grant through the NFL to purchase a new scoreboard that would have the capabilities to add video display in the future, once those dollars are fundraised. The NFL wouldn't pay for that, but
Sure.
the other part. So I will keep you posted as things move along.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sikich. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Sikich's committee? Or any comments?
Glad to hear the scoreboard, because that's been something that a lot of members of the public have been, like to have fixed.
Any questions you'd like to take back to the committee for the next meeting? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 8.2.2, our Financial Stability and Efficiency Committee report from Ms. Kaiser.
All right, these are a lot longer than my old curriculum ones. On July 21st, the FSD committee met with Jeff Borland, who facilitated. We have several updates to report tonight. The health insurance request for proposals. We want a low disruption for our staff, especially in regards to keeping their own doctors and medical supports. There's a survey open to staff until August 1st regarding this change. So far, we've had 6 bids, but 2 match our needs at 99%, and we'll be interviewing for them soon. Both bids have offered money to go toward our wellness center. There will be a board workshop on August 15th to discuss these bids. The wellness center request for proposals, we have had 4 bids worth our time for reviews. We're committed to continuing to provide high-quality care to our staff with any new provider. Looking to have more updates later in the fall. A concern that came up was having very minimal disruption to the care to our staff members, and we've been told it'd be less than a day or 2, hopefully. In regards to limited term and short-term disability requests for proposals, I believe that's coming up also on the August 15th workshop. The current company hasn't raised costs or changed their services, but it's always good to look out in the market after a few years and make sure we're doing what's best for our district. So far, we have 2 bids being reviewed. We did a first read on 5 Neolia policy updates. All the policies were clarifications, legalese, and our updated language. And finally, OPEB retirement updates. We need to have an actuary study done before we can develop a plan, and there'll be an update to the board in a few months.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser. Any questions for Ms. Kaiser or her committee? Or any topics that they would like possibly reviewed at their next meeting or in future meetings? I know I brought this up, I don't know, it might be on your list of things to consider, but I just want to make sure that it is. Looking into an activities bus for co-curricular activities after school that I know we need to do some work on that, but I'd like to see if we can maybe look at what the finances will cost the district about adding that and see if that might help with some of the K through 12 sports as well as other extra co-curriculars that we have here in the district's participation rates maybe be able to be increased by that, so.
Got
I
it,
know I've brought it up
thank you.
before, but I don't know if it's on the list, just wanted to make sure. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to item 8.3, board member reports of community events. Is there any community events board members like to report on? It's the summer, so we have fewer than during the school year, but always want to give people an opportunity. Mr. Becker?
I went to the recreation adult day event today.
Mhm.
I went and had some coffee and some snacks and spoke with a few of our Special Olympics participants, met a few of the people who run the program. Met one of Mr. Sikich's former assistant coaches, so it was a nice opportunity to meet some more people. One of the participants was a graduate from the Franklin Fieldhouse program too, so that was nice seeing some familiar faces.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Glad you could attend. Ms. Lee?
I had gone to the football, oh gosh, what was it? The football game up at Titan Stadium.
Oh,
So it was for I think it was titled
That's the Coaches All-Star Game.
the Coaches All-Star Game, that's what it was. I couldn't
Sponsored by
think.
the Coaches
Yeah, so
Association.
there was one player from Hale, that was asked to play Lucas Collings.
Hmm.
So I had gone up there and had the opportunity to watch him play, which was pretty awesome because, we hadn't had a player from Hale anyway, I understood, asked to play in 6 years, I believe.
Hmm.
So it was pretty cool to be able to go and check that out and watch him play, so that was pretty interesting. That was pretty cool.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyone else, anything to share?
Matilda and 1776 are coming up, so I hope folks can get their tickets and go. Our theater department is the best.
I second that. If nothing else, then we'll move on to our consent agenda this evening. So we have item 9.1, the approval of minutes from our July 11th meeting. Item 9.2, employment summary. Item 9.3, our supplementary contracts. And item 9.4, our financial summary. Does anyone need anything separated out?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? All right, that passes. I believe we have.
Yep. Yeah, so what we wanted to do this evening is just introduce publicly Brian Summerfield as the interim principal at Central High School. And even though when we appoint someone into an interim role, it doesn't officially get approved by the board through the employment summary, but given that leadership in high schools in communities are typically a high-profile position, thought it's an opportunity to introduce Brian and allow Brian to introduce himself to the community and to the board and the community and who's watching with us this evening. So welcome, Brian, and congratulations.
Thank you. It was 3 years ago where I was up here at a similar capacity, coming into an assistant principal role at West Dallas Central. And I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to serve as the principal in this interim basis for now at West Dallas Central. And we have a ton of work to do, but I'm very excited. Central's a special place. The kids are why I choose to work at West Dallas Central, and we have a powerful staff. We have a lot of work to do, but we're really excited. And like I said, the 3 years there, we've seen a lot of growth and a lot of opportunities, and we really want to expand on those. For me, for my priority, I want to make sure, first and foremost, kids are safe. That's the number one job. Myself and our admin team and our school staff, if our staff isn't safe, our students are safe, we can't learn effectively. And then we can start focusing on those SEL goals and our academic goals. But I'm really excited. I'm really thankful for the opportunity that Dr. Lexman and the board has given me for Central this year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will now move on to our action items for this evening, which is just one, item 10.1. Policy number 6235, fund balance as a second reading. Mr. Norris.
Thanks again for having me back. This is no change to the first read. And so just for some background, policy 6235 was a recommendation during our 2021 audit to update the language as it aligns with our assigned fund balance from our prior policy to now. And so that's just some background from the first reading to now, just for some information. So any questions, I suppose, since there's no changes?
Any questions? If not, I'd look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. So we're going to move right into our workshop with Ms. Matarazzo. Yep, we gotta come to a microphone. That's
Yes,
the
I
only
can really
thing.
hear you.
Okay.
Well, good evening. Suzette and I just realized that some of you don't know me, and I don't know some of you. Others have been seeing me for years on end and are still subject to this. So my name's Melissa Matarazzo. I work for an organization called Studer Education, and we've supported leadership, strategy, and organizational improvement in West Allis, West Milwaukee since 2016. So what I'd like to do this evening is bring the board together around your current strategic plan and its impact on your decision-making, as well as engage you with the directors around some goal setting for next year. And as you know well, we are coming out of a couple of years where we were hanging on by the seat of our pants, maybe not in West Allis, West Milwaukee, but in most places. So this is a great example of us returning to what we feel confident is the routine that gives us our best possibility for impact. So first, let me give you some background. As I mentioned, our relationship here began in 2016, and that was an occasion for a community-wide development of a strategic plan. The district had not had one for some years. You may be familiar with strategic plans in your other roles, or at least the concept of strategy and aiming towards the future. And so we brought that concept in, worked with a large steering committee that represented folks from around the district. At the time, I think Mr. Sikich and maybe Ms. Carr both served or were part of that committee, which was some years ago. So that developed into the building blocks that are so familiar to you today. They're the names of your committees. There's the way in which we think about the overall organization of what we're trying to improve across the district. At that time, we didn't touch the vision and the mission and the core values. We felt it was more important to get real clear about what the district wanted to work on in the coming years. Then, as the years passed, we did arrive at a place where the old vision and mission and values no longer really spoke to people, and you had made enough progress on the strategic plan that it seemed important to engage people again, to update those, to make them the words that they are now, and that I think are across the hallway or across the room from you. So you can see those, and I'm sure they're elsewhere as well. Similarly, the board in 2020 felt satisfied with the progress that was being made, but also wanted to look further out. So wanted to make some of the changes that were probably logical based on things that had shifted from 2016 to 2020, but not take a whole new direction. So in 2020, we brought people together again, and we updated some of the goals in the building blocks and some of the strategies, which is a very logical move in an organization of this size. And so now we're here, post everything that happened from 2020 to now. I believe one of our final meetings was like February of 2020. So sitting here today, we're going to reintroduce a concept called an annual district scorecard and talk with all of you about the goals and objectives for the year to come. And that's something we were typically doing before things went awry. And I just preview for you that your strategic plan currently is 2020 to 2025. So you're only a couple years out from another opportunity to refresh, revise, really engage the community again to move forward in the vision, mission, and the goals that you want to achieve. I'll just pause, since some of you participated at different parts in the process, and Dr. Lexman, you've been here for the whole ride. So if there was anything anybody wanted to add about the past, for those of you who are newer, I just want you to know kind of what you're walking into in this case.
Yes, what I'll add is that, so you said, right, the original strategic plan was a broad community effort, and it truly was. The mayor was a part of it. We had the vice president at MATC, the campus here, was a part of this. We opened the doors, and it's several rounds of feedback and iterations to get to a plan that really started to drive the momentum for us. Before COVID, we had made really important gains on the financial front, which was kind of what really kind of prompted the need for, we've got to get really focused. But we also had made some really good improvement around academic achievement, which is ultimately why we're all here. And the the academic achievement certainly took a step back during COVID. The finances have been sound, are sound, will continue to be sound. But what Deidre will share this evening is there's some emerging good news that we're getting back on track with student achievement again as well. And my whole point here is it's because we're still committed to the same strategic plan, right? We haven't dropped our focus, even though it may have been more difficult to maintain it during COVID. The strategies that we've laid out seem to be verified again in this last year. And so we've already shared that, the overall 11th grade ACT scores have gone up in all 3 high schools. So that's Central Hill and Dotke. And that's encouraging, and by a half point or more in an ACT world, that's pretty significant, doing half points. And so the other pieces are really going to be the forward exam data, which also that Deidre will share is encouraging for us. So again, it's really about having a set of targets that we're aiming at. What Melissa's going to take us through is, well, we have the 5-year target, but where do we want to be this time next year is what we're really having the conversation about right now. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And that allowed me to get my handouts that I had left in my backpack. So what I would hope, and I believe these were in your packet, but I think sometimes it's helpful to have something tangible in front of you. So this and the back page of what you'll see as it moves towards you, this is your strategic plan, and I just commend the organization for having this tight. So in other words, this is not 70 pages of things that no one is ever going to read. This is a front and back that outline your mission, what you're here for every day, your vision, what you aspire to be. And that certainly, I think, I've certainly heard things already in this meeting that relate to that vision. You have 3 core values: trust, integrity, and respect. Sometimes organizations have 17, and it's hard to keep focused on their value. You then have, for building blocks, these 4 areas of focus. Obviously, success in life through college and career readiness is your core purpose. That is why the school district exists. But if you don't attend to the other building blocks, it's very hard to see growth there. So as was just mentioned around health benefits and opportunities for that, that's a key part of your employee engagement and culture, and employees feeling that they come to work in a place that cares about them so they can care about kids. The communication and community relations, as reported out by that committee, you can see some of the topics that really relate to this notion of working together with families and the community. And then financial stability and efficiency, as Dr. Lexman said, on the front end in 2016, that was a huge focus because you were coming out of a time when that had not been the case. And luckily, not luckily, through the hard work of many, that is more of a sustain now, and you're really pushing on the community, the employee engagement, and certainly on kids and their college and career readiness. If you flip to the back of the document I just shared with you, and I'm sorry, it does require your reading glasses, I admit, you'll see the strategies. So in 2020, these were the actions that we thought would make the greatest difference in each of those building blocks. And some of them will sound familiar. They're the kinds of things that you're asked to react to vote on, to support, most likely to fund as you make decisions about the budget. And so it's the combination of what are we trying to achieve and how will we go about achieving that is the core of a strategic plan. The other part of your strategic plan that's really significant is the commitment to the equity beliefs that also occurred 2019, 2020. And these statements, while not printed there, are printed in many other places. And to me, these talk about the how as well. So if we are to truly improve the equitable outcomes for all students here, it's a matter of following what we've committed to here as you're doing those strategies. And it makes us think a little differently to have something like that documented. And it sometimes gives us a good push rather than just continuing to do what we've always done. But again, these were carefully crafted through a lot of cycles of writing and rewriting and trying to get to that language that captures it most intentionally. What questions or wonderings come from, I'm sorry, Mr. Lay, I was just taking over your role. I apologize. But I just, while we're looking at it, and you're looking at it in great depth, you know, if something doesn't make sense or you don't know what a phrase means, this is really a great time to make sure in this workshop format that you feel comfortable understanding what's there.
Ms. Carr, did you have something to say?
Just to start the conversation, I have been a part of the strategic plan since the beginning. I was in a different role. I was not a board member, but I was an employee, and I was part of a lot of the development of it. And I think that when I retired, and everybody said, what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm probably going to run for school board because I'm not done with the work. And nobody could really understand what I meant by that. And I meant the strategic plan. So I am a big believer in the strategic plan, and I kind of live and breathe it. I have it on my desk, and I'm constantly going back and revisiting it and seeing if when we meet in committee, it's to look and see, are we focusing on something that is in the strategic plan? And I think that is something that we do. So I believe that a lot of the board members, we've got a pretty good understanding of this. I do, because I've worked with a lot of people on committee, and I think that, we use this document a lot.
If you flip back to the first page, one of the things that you'll see beneath the aspirational goal statements, as I have them on the screen, are, as Dr. Lexman referred to, the targets we set in 2020 to achieve by 2025. So we were ambitious and brave as a committee, and as the group that looked at this and the board that looked at this, to say we think we can make this amount of progress in each of these measures. Now, we didn't know what was coming, but I don't think anyone here or anyone within the district team is saying abandon those, no way possible. I think what you'll hear tonight is what directors recommend as the one-year progress we can make. And it's true, in some cases, we've had to take a step back, but the progress is still available and people are still committed to it. And you're no different than many other school districts like those we work with around the nation who are reassessing from where you were during the impact of the pandemic to where you are today, and ready to really cast forward and think about the growth that you can make. So those are the 5-year goals, and in a little bit we'll look at the 1-year goals that are being recommended. It may seem obvious, but the purpose of the strategic plan is that vision of success, that 5 years out, here's where we'll be. And it's supposed to help for you to understand what are the key strategies and the key outcomes we're trying to drive. You're a school district of over 6,000 students. You could work on any number of things. And all of them would be good things. And yet, if you don't narrow your focus to some degree, you won't be able to make progress. And I think my sense of when you sit as a board member, you hear from people who want you to work on many, many, many different things. And everyone has their own personal investment in what the district can do for them. Part of the goal of the plan is to keep all of you, as well as the people working in the district, aligned that these are our priorities. And it gives you something to lean back on. When someone says, well, why aren't you working on X? You might say, that is something we could work on, but right now we're focused on Y. And so that's where it can be helpful to you to keep it at your desk so you're reminded. The other thing I think to be confident about is it was based on input from many different individuals. And so this didn't spring from Dr. Lexman or any particular individual. And certainly the refinement over time with the board's approval has tried to continue to be representative of what it is matters most in this community. So hopefully it serves as a guide for you. The other thing it's really designed to do is in a system of this scale, you could certainly have lots of folks trying to get better at things, but headed in very different directions, all thinking they're doing the right thing. And this does give the opportunity for the alignment between what's happening at this board table, what happens when Dr. Lexman and the directors gather, what happens when a school principal meets with their teachers and staff, when a department head meets with their custodians or whomever else they have. We can all see ourselves in the plan, which means folks can see a connection to how they're helping the district move forward. That might sound a little lofty, but that is certainly the intention of something like this. The way in which that gets actualized is like this. So the strategic plan is success over time. You've chosen 5 years. That's pretty typical in school districts. Now we're going to talk in a few moments about the annual plan. What are we going to aim for this year? And your directors will share, where did we finish last school year, and how far do we think we can get? This information, these district goals, influence what happens at the next level. So whether that's departments or that's schools, they look at the targets being set and the strategies being implemented across the system, and then they select from those that are also pertinent in their campus or in their department to contribute their effort. Certainly, Ms. Reamer can speak more about the campus improvement planning if the board is interested, but that's one specific place where when you see those come fall and then you see them again perhaps reported in the spring, there is an alignment between what you've decided here and then what happens in each of your campuses. Because if it doesn't happen there, it's never going to happen as an aggregate from the system. So the way we do this, multi-year was developed with community input. The annual scorecard will be annual targets and we'll move to actions. As Ms. Carr mentioned, the idea is your building block committee meetings can reference back to this at any point. And I'll share with you a proposal for how the reporting throughout the year might look, because most of the measures that you see are only gathered once a year. And as a committee, you don't want to wait for June to say, hey, how do we do this year? So we'll talk through some of the ways that you can monitor progress for adjustment, meaning if you as a committee meet monthly, there are likely some specific times of year that you can be looking at data that tells you how are we doing towards that. And I think as you go into this next generation, perhaps the integration there can really be even closer to these measures of success. So you've already done the alignment of your committees to the building blocks. Hopefully, as was mentioned, you can include reference to those annual goals at each of your meetings. You might even put them at the top of your agenda. We have done work previously, for those of you just joining us, on the organization of your committees, and I just want to say, excellent report outs from the 2 committees who reported out. That was very well done. So you could even think about your actual board agenda. Should it have alignment to the 4 building blocks in some way and reference those? And then as you're having the challenge of making the tough decisions you have to make, I just think it's asking, whatever's being recommended to you, does this help us achieve those goals, or is this gonna detract or distract from achieving those goals? And those are healthy conversations to have, because something I think is a distraction, someone else may think is fully aligned and will help us get there. But it's worth talking about as you make the most significant decisions. So one of the ways we can look at the calendar over the course of the year is in each building block, we'll look in a moment at your annual goals, but there are natural times of year that certain reports or data are available. And this is still a draft, but the idea being, for example, if you're in the Success in Life Through College and Career Readiness, who leads that one? Sounds like Ms. Kaiser, you're there, Ms. Deal? Okay, so it would make sense, and we'll finalize this as soon as we know the specifics, that in those months listed, there is some good data for you to look at that would help you see, are we getting closer to the goals there? It's not every month. We don't always have something that we can look at, but there are certainly some obvious points when your Panorama student survey results come in. That tells you a lot about how kids are feeling about their well-being and their progress at school. If you're the Employee Engagement and Culture Committee, we do a mid-year employee engagement survey before the end of year one. So that could be good data to look at. And certainly you can see across. This isn't final, and certainly I'd like the directors to weigh in further, but to give you an opportunity to not only see this now and then again next summer, we have to integrate it where it makes sense. How different would that feel from what you're already doing in your committee meetings? Does some of it look familiar? Mr. Becker is nodding your head. You only just got here. How can it already look
Yeah,
familiar?
I'm not gonna start saying anything unless these guys say something. No, but I do see what you're saying, and from my day job, it's having a strategic plan and being orderly it's all very familiar.
Oh, good. Well, super.
So committee work is a combination of kind of things that are ongoing, things that the board members in that committee, are interested in learning more about, and then like things that we have to do.
Good.
So for me, and I'm currently not on any technical committee right now, but from when I was on a committee, some of these things are familiar things that we would say, oh, we have these scores in that we can talk about, and then we're going to have a workshop with the board about like the Panorama scores or something like that. And
Yeah.
that would go through committee to see like what those things were. Same thing with the budget, the finance committee, it's like, oh, we have budget season coming up, or we have audit season coming up, these are the things that we
Yeah.
have to look on, these are things that we have to focus on. And then the board members on those committees, kind of help guide, if there's any, which direction should we be going one way or the other, help guide those things, then have workshops for the whole board to participate in when it comes to decision-making time.
And we
So-
also have the board topics calendar, which kind
Yep.
of, you can anticipate what's coming, what workshops are coming, what actions are coming. So
Good.
that's very helpful. Like, I don't see this as much different than what we are
Good.
doing there. And Suzette's great at making sure we have that updated as much as possible.
Yeah. And I
You start to
think
get into the rhythm of things too once you've been here
Yeah.
a little bit.
once you've gone through your first year, then it starts to feel like a rhythm. I think until then, it still can feel a little
Yeah.
bit scattered, has been my observation from working with folks. So I promise you, it's coming.
You'll be a pro next year.
But the calendar does bring very typical things at different times of year, and I think matching this to the board topics is important. I think the other thing, Mr. Lay, thank you for bringing up the idea of like things the board wants to learn about or information you're seeking. I think the committees have a really tough job to balance what is essential for a board member to learn about and what it would be nice to learn about, right? Because when you bring a committee together, that's a director, that's 3 or more of you giving up your time. And so I do think the balance is always making sure the board feels fully informed without wandering perhaps too far from this. So I think this is good even in your committee meetings to say, does it connect to something here? If not, maybe we can offer you a report you can read on your own time. But if it's connected to this critical stuff, yes, we want everyone to have a full understanding of what it is that's happening. So I hope that would be helpful. So now I'm going to transition to letting each of the directors in succession come up and talk about the annual goals, and they are on a separate document, if you don't mind. Thank you. This has just been completed. Oh yeah, you can go over there. Super. Yeah, sorry. So as it's coming around, you're just going to see what's on the slides, but these are the 5-year goals. So in 2020, you can see where the district was starting in students' perception of all of these different categories of social emotional well-being, as well as exclusionary discipline, graduation, and attendance. Pretty typical things to have goals about, and that was the aim across 5 years. So I'll let your director talk to you about this year.
Yep, so the annual goals, a couple of things just to kind of reinforce a few things that Melissa shared is, one thing you guys should know is when we do our employee engagement survey, the comments aren't for the public, right? Those are just shared with the principal and the leadership team at that school. But one of the questions we ask is what's going well, and regularly our equity work, our deeper learning work are mentioned as things that we are doing very well. Having some continuity and an understanding of what we're trying to do is something that does get mentioned in those comments somewhat regularly around what we're trying to do. And then when we look at it, and Amanda, I'm sure will talk about this more, other people may talk about it more, but when we look at it, we also then take the feedback to say, okay, here's some things that came through that staff would like us to improve upon, and so those are some things that then help us decide if there are things we're gonna work on right now, or there are things we wanna work on in the future. And so for you guys, employees are giving some feedback that our equity work, our deeper learning work is important, and they appreciate that that's something they feel like we're doing well in general in the comments as they come through. For our building block, the success in life through college and career readiness, the other thing that we've been working on is making sure in board updates, you're gonna see quite a bit of continuity between what is in the strategies on the back in particular and what I'm reporting back to you all on when we do our board updates. So this last time we talked a lot about our digital portfolios, which is where we're addressing like the first strategy on the back, as well as the strategy around the guaranteed and viable curriculum. Marty has said that I am no longer allowed to use the word alignment. He has scolded me and told me I'm not allowed to use that word anymore. I think Melissa would back me up that it's a super important
I'm not
word,
getting in the middle of that.
because when we did our GVC workshop, he said, oh my gosh, if one more person talked about alignment to the standards and alignment to what we're doing, I was like, that's years in the making, that's continuous from staff, that's what they're reporting back. So you'll see some continued things in our board update in the next few months around what's coming next, because we've done a really good job at making sure that our staff understand our philosophical belief around our equity work. Now it's got to turn into some action and closing some gaps and things like that. I actually don't have any forward exam data to share today. We got the information today that we are not yet allowed to share it.
Oh.
So it's okay.
Well, I didn't
You
share
didn't
any.
share
I just shared
anything,
that it's
so
good
that's
news.
good. So I'm really sorry that Marty gave you a teaser around that, and then you're not gonna hear any of that tonight. But the things that you already know that we're seeing some nice academic progress on, Marty mentioned the ACT, that's a large jump. The score is not where we'd love it to be, but that is a large jump in the middle of what was the hardest year in education ever. We got some great feedback from our new math supplementary resources for usage and things like that, and the way that we're seeing growth in our students on those. I've shared the feedback from our Scholastic data as well, and the impression our Scholastic reps and their team have about how quickly our staff adapted to some of the tools and the resources and their usage of some of those things. So that all kind of contributes, as well as our deeper learning work and our public demonstrations work, to what you'll see over time is that academic growth and achievement. For our building block, we have some scores, or we have some measures around, like Melissa shared, all the things that are up there. And so what I did was I put all of the SEL competencies for Panorama, kind of lumped those all together. What's the average of where our students are reporting right now? So that puts our baseline data, or what our baseline data was, at about 58%. And I went through and looked at current data, and about 58% of our students are reporting favorable responses to their skills in all those areas. So in a year's time, So that would be by this time next year, we'd like to see 65% of our students responding favorably to those skills. That they're growing in their own development in those skills. A few things that we added to our Panorama Suite since we developed this plan, one of them was a wellness survey. And we asked the question, do you have a trusted adult at school that you could rely on? That measure has made some significant improvement in the last couple of years. Every single one of our schools increases on that one. And that's gonna lead to these continuing to progress. When you trust the teacher and you feel like you're comfortable in the school setting, you see some growth in some of these other things. So that's where we left that measure. The percent of our schools completing public demonstrations of learning will increase from 9 to 14. So you guys are seeing some of those public demonstrations of learning when students come for their school workshops, when you go to the ones that are held at schools. A true public demonstration of learning has evidence of the academic standards present, right? And it has invitations for an authentic audience or an outside audience to come in. So we had 9 schools in this last year who truly invited the outside audience and are starting to really dive into the standards work, which is amazing. And that's really exciting. And by next year, we're really confident that at least 14 of our schools will be able to do that. There's a couple of our schools where the alignment to the school improvement plan and our strategic plan isn't quite as solid yet. That's where we're not quite ready to do some of that work, but it's important to let those teams kind of develop in due time. And so within the 5-year goal, we have no concerns about us being able to meet that. Last year, we had 617 students who experienced exclusionary discipline. That was up for us quite a bit from the 1920 school year. The year where we were virtual for a good chunk of the year, we did not include that data just because it was a bit of an anomaly. There wasn't a lot of exclusionary discipline from that school year. So 617 students having an incident of exclusionary discipline is up. We were at about 480 the year in 1920. So that's up for us quite a bit, and so we'd like to see that reduced down to 500. So that would be the decrease in the number of students experiencing exclusionary discipline. The goal around that is not to hold our students accountable for their behaviors or not to hold our students to the high standards that we've set in our Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, but it's really to say, how many of our students are feeling that disconnected where we're seeing some of those incidents at school, and are we using our restorative practices work and some of our other pieces to mitigate those situations differently? It is not unusual right now for that number to be up across the nation. I think ours probably looks better than most of the colleagues that I talk to. So I'm proud of that, but yet we've got some room to grow in that one going forward to make sure when our kids are gaining confidence in some of those other school skills, that it's not resulting in unexpected behaviors, unsafe behaviors at school that then require more exclusionary discipline.
Is this 617 unique students or incidents?
Individual students that
Okay.
experienced a form of exclusionary discipline this year. I didn't calculate in like repeat incidents, right? That's a very different issue than single students who experienced it.
Okay.
Yeah, Jane.
How did you come up with our goal for this year? So how did we get to 14 schools and 65% for Panorama? Was that an algorithm that you used, or like, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, good question. So thanks for asking that. So the 9 to 14 is where we're seeing the progress and the visioning meetings all summer, right? So that's
Okay.
where we sit down with each school team and we make some plans around if these are our strategic plan goals, right? What are we gonna actually, how is that gonna look at Franklin, right? And how is that gonna look at Franklin and all the different schools? So that number comes out of actually, you know, we didn't have necessarily a measure for that one in our overall strategic plan. We weren't counting like that, but that really came from the schools that we anticipate will be ready to do that work in this next year, realistically. And for a few schools, that the tie to the standards and the authentic audience are a bit of a push, and that's what our strategic plan partner, which is now what we're calling, what we used to call our school support team, will work on with those schools this year. How do we really get prepared to make sure that when it's a presentation of learning, you see evidence of standards and you see how students are not just talking about the thing they made or did, but they're talking about what they learned by making or doing or creating a thing. And so that's the shift in that one. The Panorama data comes purely out of the Panorama like results that we've gotten so far, and if you look at what our 5-year goal is, just breaking it down to an increment, that seemed to make some sense. And then the exclusionary discipline, it's our goal to, our baseline data changed on that one so much that the reduction, the original goal, was a reduction by, I wanna say, 5%. And we've set a little bit more of a lofty goal for this next year because it was up so high from this last year. We would have set a target of more like 20% if we had been using last year's data than the data we had to work with in 1920. So it's trying to get at a graduated measure that eventually gets us to the overall goal, which is a 5% reduction from the data we were working at the time we set that goal.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yep.
And then getting some feedback also from our team, as well as discussing some of this at our directors meeting and working with Melissa to say, how do you set annual targets that align to the overall goals you set for 5 years that actually help you continue to move the needle on the things that we're seeing some nice progress on, but we want to keep pushing and seeing even more. And then the next two, attendance, so 89.4 is what we reported last year. So getting growth at attendance for 7,400 students at large percentages and chunks is super hard in short periods of time. So we really want to look at that increasing by about a percentage point in the next school year, a percentage point and a half. And we have some targeted strategies around that with a couple of schools that struggled with attendance this last year that we'll continue to work on them with for the next school year. And then the last one is our 4-year graduation rate will increase from 88.6% to 90%. So DPI measures your graduation rate in 3 kind of cohorts. You have a 4-year cohort, a 5-year cohort, a 6-year cohort, and you actually get another one, a 7-year cohort. So the students who participate in our 18 to 21-year-old program, they clearly don't meet the 4-year cohort. They stay in school for all 7 years, but they do meet the 7-year cohort, right? And that's how DPI calculates those. The 88.6 for us, when we set the original target around this, we were at 89%, and we wanted to see it in 5 years go to 98. We, as did everyone, lots of people around the nation, took a bit of a backslide with that one in this last year. So it's really the concentration on starting to do some markers around credit attainment at the 9th grade level as opposed to waiting until like 11th and 12th grade to start to intervene. So we have some new systems in place that help us capture some of that from the get-go. And with the opportunity the board provided and supported a few years ago with students being able to choose DACI, we have some students who likely would have not found some success at a comprehensive high school model choosing to attend DACI instead now that that's more open. So the goal there is you're preventing like credit deficiency so that in the 4-year cohort you can see an increase in the number of students who are on track. The 5-year students are the ones who end up graduating in the summer and into the fall. We had another batch graduate with a GED option 2 this last week. So that's where you see the 5-year cohort. We have students who are identified as students with disabilities as well as students who are not identified as students with disabilities can now stay in school until they're 21. So occasionally we will have somebody who doesn't complete in the 4-year cohort who comes back to us 2 years later and says, I would like to re-enroll in school. As I'm now realizing not having my high school diploma is a bigger issue for us. We did not count our graduate that we had the ceremony for here from the 60s in our graduation cohort. She did not meet that 7-year window in which you could count her for graduation. But it's really just paying attention more to who's on track and who's on pace. And Panorama is helping with that as we review plans with students so that they're seeing kind of what it takes to graduate. Our portfolios will also help with that quite a bit because the requirements for graduation are going to be embedded right in the portfolio, which the students will see all the time. The number of students I meet with who are not on track, who cannot tell me how many credits they're supposed to have or cannot, right? There's a piece to that we're still working on, and we're working on it with our counselors at our high schools as well as getting students to take that ownership of their process. So the goal is that the 4-year graduation rate within the next year will go from 88.6 to 90, given kind of small incremental change. And then by next year, We anticipate that we'll be far more on track with the number of students who will graduate within the 4-year cohort, as we're still making up kind of the gap from the last couple of years. And then next year's target will likely be a much higher number in order to get us at 98%, which is our 5-year goal. That was a lot. What questions do you have?
Kristen?
It's something we'll work through in committee. But one thing I wanted to ask about attendance. How much of that was related to our policies when it came to close contact quarantine, or were these like, truant attendance concerns? I'm just wondering.
It would be really, well, I suppose I could run some reports in Skyward that might get us closer to understanding that, but if it's excused absence for medical, right, I don't know that I can pull a full report on identifying that, right? So I can check to make sure so that we can articulate those. It is a combination of all of it,
Right.
to be honest. We had a higher rate of absenteeism and genuine truancy concern this last year than we've had in a while, which again is very typical across the nation right now.
Right, we're seeing it at my school as well.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we aren't making sure we address if it's a child who just can't get to school because of other concerns, that we address that equitable side of things, if somehow.
Yeah, and we met with, as Hale is interviewing for a new dean of students, that's been part of the interview process. Like, how will you develop a plan of support for a student that has some barriers to getting to school that we actually can help mitigate?
Fantastic.
So that's part of what's been included in that plan, and then part of what Mr. Summerfield and I have been planning around for Central in this next year is shifting that work to one of our school social workers. So that if there is a known barrier to coming to school, we figure out what that is and we solve the problem as best we can. And we've gotten awfully creative around some of those things and been able to remove some barriers for kids that give them every opportunity to come to school every day.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
As we're switching out and Mary Ann joins me for the next one, I just want to probably just highlight something that was mentioned about the goal setting, particularly in this year. For many of the measures you're looking at, the past 2 or 3 years have been like this and strongly impacted by what was going on. So in some cases, we're using the data that we have to try to make our best effort, but we have to aim somewhere. And so I do think we may overshoot and do better on many of these. We may also find they were ridiculously ambitious, but we kind of have to start somewhere. And so that's why we're doing that. So
Can I jump in just very
Yes.
quickly just to explain all these people in the
Oh,
audience?
thank you.
That's
I
with
thought
you.
that would
I
be
had shared
good.
that with, and I realized that I didn't explain that to everybody. These are some of our interns that are working with us this summer who are either getting their Director of Pupil Services license or their Director of Instruction license from UWM. I am also an associate professor at UWM, and they're taking a class with me, and part of what we talk about is strategic planning. So I highly encourage them to come tonight so that they can get a sense of how ours works. They've been sitting in on visioning meetings and other meetings all summer to kind of learn our process, and I am really proud of how well our board and our district team works together on our strategic plan, so I encourage them to come. So they are not the media in the background taking notes, they are just doing their homework for us.
Picked a doozy of a night.
All right, so before we go to the annual goals, you can look at the strategic plan for what you were aiming for in 2025, related to employee engagement, staff turnover, compensation, and diversity. So I will, those were the long range, and now we'll look at what we have for this year to come.
Thank you. As all of you know, that our employees, like any other organization or company, your employees are your greatest asset, and that truly is true with West Dallas, West Milwaukee. This past year, we have spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out where we are in order to figure out where we want to go. I actually
I do believe August 2nd, I will have completed 1 year here with West Dallas. It's been very challenging, and at the beginning when I first came, it was a little frustrating because I kept saying, where's the data, where's the data, where's the data? So I have spent, especially those who have been on the committee, we have spent an enormous amount of time pulling data and looking at it. As I always say, that our goal in human resources is to provide our employees and our principals and our managers with the tools for them to do their jobs to serve the students. And this past year, there has been a number of areas where we have seen a lack of those tools, and we have been trying to address those needs as we go along. Think of it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're at the very bottom. You're providing the basic needs in order to come to school every day and, do your lesson plans, and hopefully someone catches something, learns and moves on. And that's not what we want. We want to continue to go up that ladder and become fully engaged. One way we did address the basic needs is through the and I'm skipping and I'm sorry, is with the compensation system. This past year, we have initiated a number of strategically planned initiatives in order to address that, and we will continue to do so. Things such as raising the substitution salaries, raising the EAs and the SPED EAs, providing the come to average with the new comp model, the micro-credentials, et cetera. And we will continue to look at those strategies because that's a basic need. Your salary is a basic need, and we need to get there in order to go up the ladder. We are closing the gap on our starting salaries, but we still have a little ways to go, and we will continue to do so. As far as the success measures, we have our engagement survey, and our goal this year is to go from 603 to 703 participants. This survey provides invaluable information to the principals. It also helps us to determine, is there something lacking at a certain school that we need to address? As Erin and I just had the conversation, is that especially when you get to the turnover, there is a correlation between employees that are happy and satisfied at their job and them staying. And that certainly is reflected in the engagement survey. We're hoping to raise the overall mean from 3.67 to 3.77. And then we get to the turnover. Now, this may look as a rather lofty goal. However, I'm kind of like at the point of go big or go home. But unfortunately, our staff turnover did come in at 20.51% this year. And our goal is to lower that to 6.5. I did pull some statistic, and nationwide it's hovering around 16%. So again, ultimately, we want it to be lower, but if we can at least get with the national average, then it is something to start shooting for. And as far as this year we'll continue to do the salary, but we are working with Erin's team on the benefits. It will be a challenge. It will be a dissatisfier that the We Trust is no longer going to be in business. But I am happy to report that Erin's doing a great job, him and his team, to ensure that is as smooth of a transition as possible. If any of you've been through a switch in providers, there's always going to be issues, but the farther out we can get ahead of that and communicate, the better off that and the smoother transition that will be. And as far as the diversity, we currently are sitting at 7.1%, and our goal is to raise that to 10.1%. Again, it might be a little lofty, but I'm shooting for the stars. So. Questions?
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
Actually, the first question I have is how many employees do we have?
The exact number.
I mean, about a ballpark. I'm just trying to.
That would
we're
take
at
the
about-
survey.
Well, we're at about 700 professional staff.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
And then my other question was. I don't
That's
remember
okay.
what my other question was. So
It'll
hopefully
come
we'll
back.
come or somebody else will ask it.
Well, and to be honest with you, with the survey results, I think my department needs to take a greater role in trying to promote that.
Okay. No, I'm just
And
was curious.
communicating the importance of it. I don't think folks realize how much we rely on that data. It's their chance to voice their concerns.
Have we ever thought of doing like an incentive behind it? Like at where I work, like if we fill out our employee survey, they give us a free lunch. I'm just
So
asking.
our only challenge is the anonymity of the survey.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow they must get around that for you.
The only thing, well, we just go up and say we filled it out. So I guess it's like a, like
Honor.
we don't say it like it's a, yeah. So we were just like, I mean, they trust us, or we could say like, oh, here's the thank you that shows it is.
Yeah.
But I was just.
You've actually done some nice incentives around the parent satisfaction survey, which we could maybe think about again, but I don't know that they thought about it for the employees, so that's helpful. And there was a nationwide in our districts that we work with, there was a decline in participation for employees and parents and families this past year. I think sheer exhaustion is the main reason, but to your point, you really want to have a great response rate. To Ms. Kaiser?
I think I don't want to speak for Ms. Deal, just the fact that, district employee survey went from 791 as a baseline to the baseline now is
603.
603. So I'm just wondering if we lost a lot of, just refiguring staff from when this was developed.
I don't think that is
Yeah.
the,
I think it's not taking the survey.
Not taking the survey. And the other was increasing employee engagement from 352 to 402 originally to now 36. I guess that's a increase. Not looking at that.
Baseline increase, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm over there.
Thanks. Mr. Lett?
I would just make one suggestion. Because the number of employees we have does change, making that from a number to a percent.
Yeah.
Because the percent is really what we want to see a change in, so it doesn't matter if we have 800 employees to 600 employees, whatever. Just make it a percent, and then that way you're looking like, oh, we want to see an increase of X percent. And then that can be based, and then you can calculate that based on how many employees we actually ended up having, because maybe we wanted to have X amount, but we only filled, so many seats, right? So then we don't want that to count against us as far as our goal goes, just because the percent will be a better, I think, way to look at that, so.
Thank you. Yes.
I think at one point, we talked about this as a board, it came up, but I think this would be a question for Melissa. We're talking about the surveys themselves, and we've had those surveys for quite a few years now, and that can be a real plus because they know exactly what to expect, but it can also, I believe, decrease
Yeah.
the participation, and it also becomes a bit stale. Like, I just know I'm gonna answer these questions. Can you speak to that?
Well, I didn't plant you to ask that question, but
Yeah.
this summer, and through the course of last year and into this summer, we are upgrading our survey items. We've been watching the research around experience, both for students and families, but also for employees. And so coming this year, we'll be discussing with the district. They're similarly aligned, if I'm allowed to say that, but they are slightly, sorry, I've worked with him a long time, I think that's okay. But they are slightly differently worded, and there are a couple new ones. So for example, we're introducing an item around, I speak about the place I work with pride. So there's just some variation there. And so I think to your point, we've been using those items for a decade. And so I think it does, people are different and generations are different and folks are looking for different things in their work experience. So it won't be dramatic, but I do think it'll catch people's attention, and hopefully while we're also trying to drive participation, it's a little more interesting than the same. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Kind of following up on that, because my company that I work for does the same thing, but they do it quarterly. And And the questions are pretty much the same. So it does get to be a little bit of, assessment or feedback fatigue. However, what they do very well is they take that information and they actually report on it. They give back the findings to the employees and say, hey, this is the results that we got. And from this, these are some rocks that we are going to work on in the next quarter to work towards improvement in those areas. So I think that's a good way to get engagement as well, is to communicate those results regularly, and then give a plan of attack in terms of how we are going to work to address the areas of concern.
Yeah, and here, when we receive the results in December or January, which are your mid-year results, and then again in the spring, those are used in conjunction with the school improvement planning, so that whatever results are coming back, the leader should be discussing them with the people who took the survey or had the opportunity to take the survey. In schools, we haven't seen people get to quarterly. About twice a year is the extent to which they can genuinely
I wouldn't recommend it.
analyze. we do it quarterly too, and I feel probably the same way you do. But I think the twice a year does help, and we're always happy to refresh leaders, especially as they've changed on that process. But to your point, it's knowing that it made a difference that encourages people to take the survey. I don't take surveys if I don't know what's going to happen with them. But did you want to say more about improvement planning?
Yeah, well, just one, not the school improvement plans, but just how we started getting some feedback in the surveys, like, why am I taking the survey? It doesn't feel like it changes anything. So that is something that we worked into our opening day presentation then, to say, like, here's some things based on your feedback that we've adjusted in the next year. And then also there's a question that says, is there an employee that you would like to recognize, so colleagues can recognize each other for good work or whatever, and then those people get an honorarium of sorts at the opening day session. So that's the other way to try to say, yes, please keep taking the survey, because we want to show people, we do read the whole thing, we take it very seriously, and there's actual adjustments to some staff supports and things like that. When we get feedback, that's something that we can move the needle on.
So it's great that you're doing that in the opening presentation. Is there an opportunity to do something like that at semester 2 to say, hey, this is the progress we've had, and these are some of the other areas that we're now shifting focus on?
Yeah, that one usually comes, like Melissa said, at the school level when they do the
Okay.
rollout of the fall survey, Brian.
Gotcha.
But certainly that's something we're trying to balance a lot of the professional development with something new, as big as a digital portfolio rollout, to give staff more time in buildings, working with school teams this year,
Gotcha.
and finding a balance to those. So just pulling everybody all together again pulls on the time that we have. But yes, at the school site, they do a fall rollout, and then they do
Okay.
a spring rollout.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. All right. We will,
Thank you.
thank you. So in communication and community relations, the 5-year goals, as you see them, were again around the parent caregiver satisfaction, social media engagement, open rates. Some of these are kind of technical for the communication world. If any of you are in it, they probably seem very familiar, but for me, they're something I rely on an expert like Ms. Stewart for. So those are the 5-year goals, and here are our recommendations for this year.
Yes, so similar to Mary Ann, I just completed my first year, so it's been a wonderful time to reflect on that and get excited for year 2. So I did notice that in the fall, a lot of our messaging was understandably had to be around safety, pandemic, all of that. So when I read our this part about being proud to be part of an innovative and highly engaging school district, that kind of energized me, especially in the spring semester, when we were able to do more sharing about what's happening in classrooms and balance that with some of the safety messaging at the same time. So that being said, we definitely did not message as intentionally as we could have around the parent satisfaction survey. Melissa mentioned like fatigue, and just our families were taking in so much. So our parent satisfaction survey participation will be something that we'll really focus on this year, to get those numbers back up towards our 5-year goal of a 30% response rate. And then same with the overall mean. So that will be an opportunity to talk with families about why that matters, like why we do want their feedback on this survey, which is something I know last year we did not do the way that we could have. also. So, social media engagement is also interesting because the landscape of social media changes so frequently. So even from when our 5-year metrics were set in 2020, we've added platforms, we've changed how we measure those things. So one thing that I think is interesting to point out is that we focus on engagement and impressions when we see how we're doing and who we're reaching in terms of social media. So our platforms are now all housed in one system, which is really helpful because it doesn't help sometimes to just count followers when we don't know like if the same person follows us in multiple places. So having everything being measured in one software helps us to consistently track those things. So we will continue to look at engagement and also impressions to increase that to 40,000. So the way what that's basically saying is engagement is likes, comments, and shares. So all of that added together across all of our platforms. So now we measure YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, whereas impressions is looking at how many people we are reaching across all of those platforms as well. So that's just something interesting. And I look forward to this year being able to spend some time both with the committee and the board, if you're interested, diving into some of those metrics more, because it is an interesting way to see who in the community we're reaching and how. All right, so Constant Contact is our district newsletter platform that we send our monthly district newsletter through. So they set the industry standard open rate for education at 30%. So our goal has been to stay above that industry average. And this year, our open rate for our district newsletter was 53%. So that's something that we're really proud of. To get half of your subscribers to open your email newsletter is
We would really like that.
unheard of.
Yeah.
So that tells us that we're doing something right, both with who's signing up to receive our newsletter. They want to receive it, so then they want to open it. And then also, the newsletter has stayed pretty consistent in the kinds of stories and positive messages that it shares. So I think that our communities like it, and we hope to continue to grow that as well. And then finally, residents enrolling out. We would like to continue to see a decrease in our residents enrolling out. So I got to dive into this a little bit further with our manager of school services because this was a new benchmark for me to be looking at. So we're gonna work together with the enrollment center and watch this a little bit more closely than just at a snapshot when we report out at a moment like this. So that is something that we hope to see continue to go down as well.
And I would think, to the point you made earlier, Mr. Lay, about percentages rather than hard numbers, I think the parent one, we do generally have a percentage we're aiming at, but we just put the sheer numbers in just to give you a sense of the growth. I think the residents enrolling out as a percentage would be challenging because I'm not sure how often you get updated data about the available members of the community. So just, I was predicting your question and answering it and saying that that one would be kind of complicated, but I appreciate hearing what you're saying is that getting into that data, it's just sometimes you're tracking on individual kid by kid, which is a little challenging, but it is a goal for the district. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, and if it's helpful, I was curious. So in 1920, we saw 411 students enrolling out. In 21-22, it was 269, and then 318 for this coming
Got
year.
it.
So it did go down a little bit, but we're kind of just looking into that further.
For clarity, if I remember this right, for that, it's not the total number open enrolling out, it's the new,
Correct.
the
Correct.
new open enrollment outs.
Yeah.
Right, just for clarity for the board of what we're actually tracking, we're trying to reduce because once they open enroll out, they tend to stay out. What we have are when families open enroll from at the beginning, at kindergarten, a number of families come back for 9th grade, right? So, but we're really tracking new open enrollment out. While I'm talking, a piece that didn't occur to me, and I've looked at this already, I should have thought of this, Amanda, but when you talked about subscribers opening the newsletter, it might be interesting to track non-parent subscribers separately, since we're making that effort to, push out, you can subscribe for our district information. So it goes back to the whole lessons from the referendum. So it might be just an interesting one to get some baseline on, how many people do we have that signed up that aren't parents, and then how do we grow that?
Definitely.
So stakeholders.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
We could segment the audience that way, yep. That would be really interesting.
See, the more you talk about it, the better your ideas get.
Because they sign up.
Would it be worth trying to find out for the families that do open and roll out? Do we ever get any kind of rationale? Do we ever ask them what's making them enroll outside the district?
So actually, Erin was helping me quite a bit wrap my head around this, so I don't know if you want to jump in, but I was asking that question in terms of when we get this number. Is it too late?
Yeah, so I think a survey was conducted with families back in 2018. Does that sound right, Marty?
We did a really deep dive into it.
Yeah, and so at that time, so that date's now almost 5 years. It seems like that was yesterday, but at that time, a lot of the feedback we gotten from families is that a lot of the families, like Marty had said, come back in 9th grade. There are a lot of the families that had actually moved to West Dallas and continued at their school, and that was the feedback that represented, I think, a 60% rate of the families, which is alarming to hear sometimes, is that of our 1,200-ish students who choose to open and roll out, nearly 800 of them or more are families that attend MPS. I think it's surprising for people to hear sometimes. But of that, they usually are enrolled in K-8s, or in early elementary, and then if they're in a K-5, that's why we see an increase in enrollment in 6th grade. A lot of those families, when they come in, that's where they're coming from. And then similarly, the K-8s. Yeah. But I do think it would be reasonable in the near future to do a concentrated effort to target those families, whether it's qualitative with a survey or even phone outreach. We see a lot of success in getting families to come. The letters that go out don't generate a lot. It's the week after they get them, it's the enrollment center calling and putting a personal touch with that, and that's the letter I got, I didn't open it, whatever that looks like, yeah.
And then even going beyond that, what would it take to bring you back into the district?
Right.
Just what are our areas of improvement?
Yeah, it was part of what we asked even in that 2018, because that was, we contracted out for that. It was a whole bunch of phone call follow-ups. We could share that back with the board, and maybe worth repeating. Who knows how much COVID has changed the decision-making around that. It's could be interesting to do it again.
Yeah, I think even from a messaging standpoint about some of the different programs that we have, from the Deeper Learning Virtual Academy to some of the work that's going on in the schools, I think it would be definitely a good opportunity, like from a marketing perspective, to outreach to some of those families who that may be some of the reason they did leave, and now with COVID, some of the reason why they might choose to come back.
I think the interesting thing to try to get around is why they left in the first place, and what we can do to proactively change some of those reasons before they get to that point. Because to your point, I think it's a little bit harder once we lose them and they build a relationship at a new school. I think they're largely going to stay at that school at least until a transition point. So whatever we can do to get in front of the reasons that they are leaving in the first place, I think is going to be what ultimately helps lower that number.
Great points. All right, well, Mr. Norris, you're here, and we're going to move on to financial stability and efficiency. We won't let you go back to your seat. So as you can see in the 5-year goals, there were considerable interest in reducing audit findings, careful attention to your fund balance and credit rating, and then the continuous work of the facilities master plan and effective budgeting. So I'll let him talk about what you'll aim for this year.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So similar to the, I believe it was the June 27th meeting where I had like 7 action items here to report.
I think they remember them.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely. We all can't forget that one. So, but here to report good news. So similar to the annual goals, just starting with audit findings back in, 4 or 5 years ago, we had double-digit audit findings, which, talking with Mark Duff, who's been in this work for 20 plus years, that's alarming, right? Double-digit audit findings is in his world unbelievable, right? So coming to a place where in 2020 we had 4, is tremendous, tremendous improvement, and that's, you know, accredited to probably everyone in this room and far many people that are not today. So the goal would be to keep incrementally decreasing those, with the hope that it goes to zero, even though in Mark's opinion that's unlikely. It's like you submit the English paper and the professor always finds something wrong with it, kind of thing. That's kind of what he said. So he's like, you shoot for the moon, but it's, you know, they always find something, and that's okay. You just make the improvements, just similar to our second read today. And with the goal to develop a relationship and continue a relationship with our auditors. That way those audit findings become recommendations. And back at that time, our auditors actually fired us, if you can remember back that far. So we had to hire a new audit firm. And
Yep, I remember.
the goal is developing a relationship, and then through that relationship becomes mutual trust. And mutual trust becomes just working collaboration, similar to what we're doing today, collaborating around goals and recommendations moving forward. So that's the first goal. Kind of leading right into the next part is fund balance. So we're in a very, very good place with our fund balance. We're well beyond the 20% of our allocated fund of every year. So we're in a very good place. So sustain or increase. Really, in my opinion, the goal would be sustainability, and then any surplus, like we've been discussing with budget amendments, and you know, surplus is finding, you know, district goals and initiatives to align those funds with, whether it's capital improvement, whether it's pushing money out for, you know, CIP needs, increasing budgets for following years, teacher compensation, you know, anything along those lines. I think that aligns with the work we're talking about tonight. So that's the second one. Increasing our credit rating. So I'm going to look at my notes here for a second. So we were at a Baa1, which is considered by Moody's to be a lower medium grade. So essentially it's considered a junk bond. And so the goal was to move to an AAA3, and happy to report tonight that we're at an AAA2, which is a high grade. Of the school districts in the state, there's only 20% that are in that range. So I believe that I wrote sustain, increase or sustain. You know, sustaining a credit rating of that high is impressive to creditors. You know, and I think that's really, really proud to report that. So facilities master plan, I feel like we've been talking about that for, you know, almost a year now. So I think the goal this year will be to, once we've continued to work on kind of what the plan is with the 3 schools that we are closing, to update that, because a lot of our long-range plans included those schools. So now that will need to be updated. So I think when that decision is made, formalizing that recommendation, updating the master plan, having a workshop this spring, discussing what that might look like. How does part of what Steve's going to talk about in a few weeks is how does the short-term and long-term facility goals align with his budgets, so that we can start to talk about how those two connect. I think that's been a piece that's been missing, and I think working through the long-range master plan into the spring, once some of these decisions are made and formalized, we can start to align dollar amounts with some of these projects to make sense of that. So I think that's been on there. I think we have been working on that. I think I'm really proud of that, but I think moving forward to how that's updated is going to be the work for this year, I think. So, and then really the last bullet connects with the fund balance piece, accurately budgeting, so that way we don't have a surplus of more than 2%, is really just trying to appropriately use our funds to provide our students with the best experience in a year in, year out, and our teachers. So if we do have over a 2% surplus, it goes right back into that discussion about where do we use that funds to best plan long-term or for the following school year. So we were just over 2% last year. It's kind of hard to think about it like that. $3 million in budget amendments represents about 2.5% of our overall budget. So we were right there, and I think that's good. So, any questions?
Good job.
One thing I would say is that we'll always have at least one audit finding, because we don't have a separate accountant that we employ.
Oh.
So until we hire, if and when the board would decide to hire someone to do that, that's always a finding.
Always a finding, yeah.
Because it's we're not having an accountant do this for us, we're paying Baker Tilly to do it for us, so
Gotcha.
that's why.
That's
So
right.
we'll always have at least one.
Just one.
Yeah. Which is okay in my books.
You'd be pretty proud if you got there. All right, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
So, thank you for your engagement. That was a lot of information and a lot of detail. And, but it's your guide, it's your framework for the next 12 months, and the same for all these folks who work so closely with you. So I appreciate the degree to which you're making sense of it for yourselves, that you'll have an opportunity to come back around it more often. I do think as next steps, that draft calendar that I shared about when you would progress report, probably each committee and director should refine that, make sure it matches the board topics calendar and also the data that's available, and then just continue as you have been doing, having those committee meetings and then bringing forward to this board, to the full board, those things that align to your plan. It is easier to get pulled off it than it is to stick to it. So that's the other reason that I sometimes come around a couple times a year, just as a friendly reminder that it's still there. And it, as you heard from your directors, it's really guiding the choices they make, and I imagine will guide your choices as well. So unless there are other questions, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Good work.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes our workshop. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene into closed session. So right now, we will be at recess.
Yes. Ms. Deal.
Here. Here.
Mr. Sickich.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mrs. Carr.
Here.
Mr. Becker.
Here.
Mr. Burns is excused. Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
President Lee.
Here. All right, so basically what I'm looking for is a motion to move forward with the process for our superintendent search, which would involve an RFP starting with an RFP for search committees, or search firms.
I move for us to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Jeff
Jeff.
started.
Oh, I wasn't gonna say, because I heard you said talk.
Oh, I move to move forward with a search RFP for superintendent, like a firm to help us out. No, I don't think we need to do national, do we have to say national search for a firm?
No, just,
A
I'm
search,
sorry, I guess
search
that's,
firm.
yeah.
Search firm for superintendent.
Seconded.
All right,
I'm an
is that,
Does that work?
Maybe next time,
Yeah.
Kristen does.
all right.
All right.
We have a motion and a second. Any last minute discussion about that process?
No.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes, and then look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I can't even get it out.
All those in favor?
We
Aye.
We are
Opposed?
such a cohesive board unless it comes to second.
We are